Okay. I'm going to stand. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
No, you're going to tell me no. No, really, rather. Oh, the stand.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, sure.
Here's this.
Let's see. Easier. That's great. Thank you. I guess I. Thank you. Second. Fire. Can you hear me okay? Yep. No. It's not coming through the mic.
Okay, so put it in there. Up to your mouth.
Are we good? Can you hear me okay? That's good. All right. Okay, thank you for being
Thanks,
patient.
Tracy.
I'm going to read some poems. First, I just want to say how happy I am to be here and with all of you, and to be reading with both of you. What an honor. I'm delighted. And this first poem that I'm going to read is about poetry. There are many reasons why I love poetry, but I think the one that's the most important to me, the one that is most essential, is that it helps me to do something that's very hard for me to do in my life. But when I'm in a poem, when I'm writing a poem, or sometimes reading a poem, I'm able to, which is to accept what's happening. In poetry, we don't want only good things. And in life, I mean, most of us want what we want, and we don't want what we don't want. And it's very hard to want what we don't want. But in poetry, I mean, you know, like we don't want only Shakespearean comedies. We want the tragedy. We want everything. And so I was thinking about that, and that's where this poem arose from, and it's called Everything on the Menu. In a poem, it doesn't matter if the house is dirty. Dust that claims the photographs like a smothering love. Sand spilled from a boy's sneaker. The faceted grains scattered on the emerald rug like the stars and planets of a tiny solar system. Monopoly butted up against Dostoevsky. El Techo, a shiny sticker, labeling the ceiling. From the summer, a nephew studied Spanish. Mold on bread in the refrigerator is as interesting as lichen on an oak. Its minuscule hairs like the fuzz on an infant's head. Its delicate blues and spring greens. Its plethora of spores. Whole continents of creatures dazzling our palms. In a poem, life and death are equal. We receive the child crushed like gravel under the tire, and the grandfather at the open grave holding her small blue sweatshirt to his face. And we welcome the baby, born at daybreak, the mother naked, squatting and pushing in front of the picture window just as the garbage truck roars up and men jump out, clanking metal cans into its maw. In a poem, we don't care if you got hired or fired, lost or found love, recovered or kept drinking. You don't have to exercise or forgive. We're hungry. we'll take everything on the menu. In poems, joy and sorrow are mates. They lie down together, their hands all over each other. Fingers swollen in mouths, nipples chafed to flame. Their sexes fitting seamlessly as day and night. They arch over us, glistening and bucking, the portals through which we enter our lives. I wrote this poem some years back before the possibility of gay marriage was rolling in the way it is, and I wanted to read it as a kind of hopefulness. But I was working on a poem, and you really see how terrible it is that we don't have gay marriage when you're trying to write a poem. Because it is just impossible to have a good language for what you want. And I had this poem, and I just was struggling with the word, and I couldn't find anything, and I was getting really frustrated. And I opened up my thesaurus, which is from the 1950s. I have an older brother, and it's his thesaurus that I've been using all these years. And I just started reading these words for the person that you love, and they were so wonderful. So this is called Bone of My Bone and Flesh of My Flesh. I can't always refer to the woman I love, my children's other mother, as my darling, my beloved, sugar in my bowl. No, I need a common utilitarian word that calls no more attention to itself than nouns like grass, bread, house. The terms husband and wife are perfect for that. Hassling with PG&E or dropping off dry cleaning, you don't want to say, the light of my life doesn't last. Don't suggest spouse, a hideous word, and partner is sterile as a boardroom. Couldn't we afford a term for the woman who carried that girl in her arms when she was still all promise? That boy curled inside her womb. And today, when I go to kiss her and she says, not now, I'm reading, still, she deserves a syllable or two. If only so I can express how furious she makes me. But maybe it's better this way. No puny pencil stub of a word. Maybe these are exactly the times to drag out the whole galaxy of endearments. Buttercup, I should say. Lambkin. Mon petit chou. Set down War and Peace just for a moment and lift your ruby lips to mine. And talking to the dishwasher repairman, the vacuum cleaner sales clerk, the woman in the Blue Cross billing department. I could explain that I'd already sent the copay for my soulmate, my duckling, my chocolate-covered cream puff. Maybe it would brighten her day too. Hello, I might say, you precious, you jewel, oh, queen among queens, darling, honey pie, angel, my sweet patootie. One of the things that is a lot of fun in poetry and challenging sometimes is, and we've talked about this a little bit in class, but we'll talk about it more, is yoking things together that we don't normally think of as going together. And sometimes for me, the way a poem gets started is, it seems like there's some connection between disparate things. Of course, that's what metaphor is, right? You know, connection between things that we don't usually think of as being connected. And I got this idea in my mind that there was something about how we think about God and how we think about the Gspot that had a connection. So this poem, it took me actually a long time to figure this poem out, even though it might not sound like it, but I was working it in my mind. And it's called God and the Gspot. And it starts with a epigraph, a line from Anne Druyan, Carl Sagan's wife, on why Carl didn't believe in God. and she said he didn't want to believe, he wanted to know. I want to know too. Belief and disbelief are a pair of tourists standing on swollen feet in the Prado. I like it. I don't, before the Picasso. Or the tattoo artist with a silver stud in her full red executive lips, who, as she inked in the indigo blue, said, I think that Gspot's one of those myths men use to make us feel inferior. God, the Gspot, falling in love, the earth round and spinning, the galaxies speeding in the glib flow of the Hubble expansion. I'm an East Coast Jew. We all have our opinions. But it was in the cabin at La Selva Beach, where I gave her the 30 tiny red glass hearts I'd taken back from my husband when I left. He'd never believed in them. She, though, scooped them up like water, let them drip through her fingers like someone who has so much she can afford to waste. That's the day she reached inside me for something I didn't think I had. And like pulling a fat, shining trout from the river, she pulled the river out of me. That's the way I want to know God. Okay, I'm going to read a more serious poem. Not that that's not very serious, but a different kind of serious. I have the good fortune to get to teach at Esalen and Big Sur frequently. And for those of you who haven't been there, try and go sometime to Big Sur in your life. It's so beautiful. And as I was leaving one time, I was standing there looking out over the cliffs. And I had this thought go through my head, I'm glad I don't believe in God, I couldn't stand it. And what the thought behind that was that if you believed in a personified God, and if you believed that that God could see what was going on and what we were doing to the earth, and then you'd have to believe that would hurt that God would suffer from that. And then if you loved that God, you would have to have empathy and sympathy for what that God was going through, and that you just couldn't stand thinking about that. And it was a line that, we talked about this, the bay leaf in the poem, it was the line that was in there for a really long time. This was the line that meant the most to me, but it had to come out of the poem because it had already done its work. So you're not going to hear that line in the poem, but that's where it came from for me. It's called God's Grief. Great parent, who must have started out with such high hopes. What magnitude of suffering, the immensity of guilt, the staggering despair. A mind the size of the sun, burning with longing, a heart huge as a gray whale, breaching, streaming seawater against the pale sky. Man God or beast God, God that breathes in every pleated leaf, throat sac of frog, pin feather and shaft. God of plutonium and penicillin, drunk, sleeping on the subway grate. God of Joan of Arc, God of Crazy Horse, Lady Day bringing us to our knees. God of Houdini with hands like a river, of Einstein, regret running thick in his veins. God of Stalin, God of Somoza, God of the Long March, the Trail of Tears, the trains. God of Allende and God of Tookie, the strawberry picker, fire in his back. God of midnight, God of winter, God of rouged children sold with a week's lodging and airfare to Thailand. God in trouble, God at the end of his rope, sleepless, helpless, desperate God, frantic God, whale heart lost in the shallows, beached on the sand, parched, blistered, crushed by gravity's massive weight. And I'll read one more from from this book and then a couple of new ones. This is called If You Knew. What if you knew you'd be the last to touch someone? If you were taking tickets, for example, at the theater, tearing them, giving back the ragged stubs, you might take care to touch that palm, brush your fingertips along the lifeline's crease. When a man pulls his wheeled suitcase too slowly through the airport, when the car in front of me doesn't signal, when the clerk at the pharmacy won't say thank you, I don't remember they're going to die. A friend told me she'd been with her aunt. They just had lunch, and the waiter, a young gay man with plum black eyes, joked as he served the coffee, kissed her aunt's powdered cheek when they left. Then they walked half a block, and her aunt dropped dead on the sidewalk. How close does the dragon's spume have to come? How wide does the crack in heaven have to split? What would people look like if we could see them as they are, soaked in honey, stung and swollen, reckless, pinned against time?